Apologies come first. Entry comes second. She said it like a policy taped to a window. No heat, no tremor, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Paige didn't reach for the knob or lift her chin. She simply stood in the doorway of the house my hands had scrubbed and painted and winterized for nearly 4 decades, and announced my condition for being allowed inside. Evan, my son, tall as the doorframe and suddenly small as a boy, studied the grooves in the plank beneath his shoes. He folded his arms like he was cold, though the late September air in Kingsford, Ohio, was warm and heavy with the sound of distant lawn sprinklers. He didn't look at me. He didn't look anywhere you'd call brave. "I brought the archive boxes," I said, holding up 2 cartons that used to live above my bedroom closet. "You said you wanted to sort photos." Paige's mouth formed a polite crescent. "We prefer to curate what comes into the home." "Our home," I said before the word could curdle. "Mine too." Evan's throat moved. Nothing came out. Inside those cartons were fragments of a long, ordinary miracle. School programs, a stack of postcards from road trips with my late husband Nolan, the paper napkin with a ring-shaped coffee stain he once turned into a doodled planet. There was also a folded flag from a parade Lena marched in with the school band, and a recipe card for cinnamon bread written in a loopy hand that isn't on this earth anymore. I had rescued, not rummaged. I had tended, not trespassed. "Ruth," Paige said, a sunny barista tone poured over a blade, "will be glad to look through them after you clear the air." Clear the air. People say that when they want you to admit to a kind of weather you didn't make. Evan adjusted his stance. The maple tree we planted when he was 8 threw a stippled shade over his shoes. He used to climb that tree, come inside with bark on his palms, and tell me everything he'd learned that day, like secrets were a currency, and I was wealthy. Now he wouldn't offer me a glance. "I'll leave the boxes," I said. "I won't leave a confession." Paige's smile held. "Then we're finished for today." Finished, like a line at the end of a memo. I set the cartons on the porch, carefully, as if I were placing 2 sleeping cats on a sun-warmed step. My knee made a noise I didn't care to translate. I took in the front room through the window. New curtains, new rug, newer couch, a color palette that had the temperature of a waiting room. My chair, the soft blue one Nolan used to say fit my shoulders, wasn't there anymore. The house looked impressed with itself and empty at the same time. "Evan," I said, and when his name came out it sounded like I'd kept it under my tongue for safekeeping. "You asked me for those photographs." He nodded at the boards. "We will look later, Mom." Not come in. Not let's talk. Later, the calendar where never keeps its coat. I didn't cry by the railings Nolan had sanded, smooth the spring of '86. I didn't cry when the squirrel shot across the fence, like punctuation. I didn't cry even when a neighbor walked by with a golden retriever that wagged at me as if dogs still recognized the simplest truth. Who belongs? Instead, something steady and quiet in me stood up. It wasn't anger. Anger blows through and leaves everything where it found it. This was heavier, patient, exact. A carpenter's line. I put one foot on the path and felt the porch behind me like a room cooling. I walked to my car, the same cracked leather seat I've slid into for 19 winters, turned the key, and let the engine find its voice. As I backed out of the driveway, I didn't look at the front door. I looked at the mailbox Nolan once painted fire engine red because he said our letters deserved ceremony. Then I turned left at the stop sign where Evan had learned the 3-count rule and thought, "You will not keep me here with your silence, your policies, or your soft hands holding a locked door." By the time I reached my own kitchen, mine because my name still sits on the deed in ink that won't apologize, my plan had already put on its shoes. The kitchen smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and dry sage from the backyard bed. The afternoon light laid a stripe across the table, the exact width of my palm. I set my purse down and listened to the house breathe. Houses do that when you've kept them company long enough. They click and settle and offer you little sounds like they're checking if you're all right. On the counter sat the ceramic bowl Nolan bought at the church fair the summer we had no money and still gave ourselves something handmade. I ran a finger along the rim. Felt the nick he called a dimple. He used to come through this doorway whistling off-key, tapping newspaper headlines with a spoon, asking if I'd tasted this, seen that, heard the newborn wren under the eaves. The afternoon he didn't. Winter had dressed the world without warning. 1 hour he was mending the loose hinge under the sink. The next the ER lights had that stainless brightness that makes everyone's vocabulary shrink. They said words like embolism, sudden, and we're sorry, and the room traded oxygen for static. That was years ago. Years in which I learned to keep moving the way someone keeps water from boiling over. Watch the burner, nudge the pot, turn down the heat. I taught part-time at the community center. Shelved paperbacks at the library on Tuesdays because the paperbacks never talk back. Grew tomatoes that split in August and showed up. I have been a whole life lived at ordinary speed. I have not been a problem you post at the edge of the porch with terms and conditions. The phone blinked, one message. My granddaughter. Lena is 19 and brave in the ways that count. She asks real questions and waits. Grandma, Dad says you weren't feeling great. Just checking on you. Love you. Not feeling great. Such an efficient way to rename the weather. I made a drink, hot water over a wedge of lemon and a spoon of honey, and cradled it as if it could answer anything. Steam rose like a patient curtain. Across the table, those 2 cartons weren't here. I had left them on the step like a person sets down a burden in the middle of a bridge. Good. Let them inventory what they refused to carry. A knock knuckled the side door. I startled, then smiled before I even turned the latch. I brought you something that was supposed to be for us after church, said Mrs. Whitaker from next door, the kind of neighbor who remembers your birthday and your preferred jam. She held a foil-covered pan that smelled like pears and butter and cinnamon warm slow. But I'm better at making too much than letting people go hungry. May, I said, because that's her name and because saying a friend's name is a small prayer. You always show up where a chair should be. She studied my face the way nurses do, kindly without looking away. Eat first, she said. Talk later. When she left, the house felt less hollow, the way a hand on your shoulder does what a paragraph can't. I set the tart in the oven to keep it warm and opened the drawer by the fridge that sticks when it rains. Beneath the rubber bands and tape and a birthday candle shaped like a 7 sat a thin file folder with a brass fastener. Deed. County records. Notary stamp dated 11 summers ago, when Evan began handling the escrow. A phrase that sounded like help until the ledger of favors grew teeth. Joint ownership, tenancy in common, after a lawyer said it would simplify planning. I'd signed because grief makes you sign things, and because Evan's voice had been so gentle that day you'd have believed he was tucking you in. I lined up the pages on the table like cards and looked at the clause I'd insisted on. Right to occupy or sell at my discretion. A corner of the paper had a coffee ring. The ghost of some morning I was still a mother who couldn't imagine not being listened to. Outside, a wind chime from 3 houses down tested one note over and over, as if it were practicing for something important. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Lena wants to swing by this weekend. Please don't make it strange. Not how are you? Not can we talk? Please don't make it strange. As if I had reached into the room and rearranged all the oxygen. I didn't answer. I pressed the file flat with my palm until the paper warmed to my skin. Here is the part of the story where people usually ask if the decision came like thunder or if I slept on it or if I wrote a letter I never sent. None of that. It was as clean as the line May draws when she cuts pie. Place the knife, press down, turn. No flourish. No second pass. I pulled a notebook from the pantry, spiral-bound, purchased with coupons, the kind of notebook you use for grocery lists and reminders not to forget the magnolia fertilizer, and opened to a blank page. My hand was steady. Across the top, I wrote, "To do before the door knows it lost me." Under that, call bank. Find a real estate agent who isn't afraid of family weather. Box what is mine by memory, not by label. Make space for silence that doesn't punish. I circled the first item twice, as if it were a lens to see through. The bank sat 3 blocks from the square, with the statue no one can agree on. The man behind the glass was young and meticulous, the sort who calls everyone Ms. and over-explains forms because he likes the way precision sounds in a quiet room. That visit will belong to part 2. I'm telling you only this much now. The path from decision to action is shorter than people think. It is as brief as dialing numbers you haven't called in years, and speaking without the softeners women are trained to add like sugar. But before the bank, the kitchen. I took a plate from the cabinet and cut a square of maize tart. Steam lifted and carried a scent that reminded me of the orchard Nolan and I used to drive to in late October when the trees were bonfire bright, and our marriage was a map we hadn't finished drawing. I ate standing up, the way you do when sitting would make you stay too long with something sweet. Paige had said, "Entry comes second," and I think that's when the revenge began. Not the loud kind, not the movie kind. The kind that looks like paperwork and quiet expertise. The kind that doesn't raise its voice because it plans to move the ground 6 inches to the left while everyone argues about where the gate used to be. I washed my plate, towel dried it, set it back in its place. Then I went room to room with a small box and a black marker and chose only what had heat when I touched it. Nolan's watch that still smelled faintly of cedar oil, the Polaroid of Evan at 7 with a missing incisor and a Band-Aid on his elbow because he believed bicycles were poetry, the postcard from Lake Erie with a gull that looks like it's considering a second career, a church program with my name misprinted as Ruthie. I kept it because errors tell the truth about attention. I labeled the box, "This is the heartbeat." I stood in the hallway and listened for the house to object. It didn't. Houses know when their chapter with you has turned the corner. They become generous in that last quiet stretch. The floorboards didn't complain. The light did that gentle spill it saves for late afternoon when the neighborhood begins to simmer down and a woman can hear herself think. My phone lit again, an unknown number this time. I let it ring into silence. Then a second message from Evan, efficient and almost kind. Let's not escalate. A funny word, escalate. The last time he used it, he was negotiating with a contractor about fence posts. Now he was applying it to his mother. People who fear conflict will call boundaries escalation because the ladder in their head leans against the wrong wall. I went to the sink and turned on the tap. Water rushed steady, a ribbon of ordinary. I stared at the stream until the small ache behind my eyes settled back into its cupboard. Then I whispered to nobody and to myself, "We're finished auditioning." The "we" surprised me, but it felt right. I am the sum of every woman who has been asked to sign her name in vapor just to keep a seat at a table she set. When dusk finally brushed its cool palm across the windows, I closed the curtains and sat with my notebook again. I crossed off nothing. I added one line, "Tomorrow make the first cut." Not the dramatic sort. The necessary sort, the quiet slice through a legal, not that everyone assumed I'd never touch because I was too sentimental to pick up the knife. I slid the deed folder beneath my pillow like a child tucking away a secret. In the den, the clock Nolan repaired with fishing line ticked with a confidence I wanted to borrow. I turned off lights with care, the way you say goodbye to rooms that have heard you laugh unpretty and sing off-key and pray without words. Then, in the dark, I said the sentence that would carry me through every phone call and policy and glance away that waited on the other side of sleep. By the time they decide whether I deserve to come in, there will be nothing left to enter. And with that, the house exhaled. So did I. The next morning, the house woke before I did. A click in the pipes, a stretch in the floorboards, the quiet confession of a structure that knows a change is coming. I dressed without thinking, gray slacks, white blouse, the same coat I'd worn to Nolan's memorial, and packed the folder. It fit into my purse like it had always been waiting for this trip. The air outside was crisp, the kind of Ohio morning that carries the scent of wet leaves and yesterday's rain. I locked the door, not because I feared theft, but because finality deserves a sound. The bank stood on the corner of Main and Elm, all brick and tinted glass, pretending to be friendlier than it was. Inside, a row of tellers smiled with professional geometry. The young man I remembered from years ago, now a manager, spotted me immediately. His nameplate read Mr. Hale, a coincidence, so sharp it made me smile. "Good morning, Ms. Marin," he said, rising from his desk. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to make some changes to my property documents," I said, "and I'd like them handled correctly. No shortcuts, no misunderstandings." He led me to a small conference room with too much air conditioning and a photograph of Lake Erie on the wall, all calm blue and shallow promises. He sat, folded his hands, and waited like a priest hearing confession. I laid out the folder, each page smoothed flat, the notary seal catching the light like a medal. "Joint ownership," I said. "Tenancy in common. The other name, my son's, was added 11 years ago after my husband passed. I'd like to exercise my right of sale." Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses, scanning each line. "Are you certain you want to proceed without the co-owner's approval?" "I'm certain I don't need it," I said. He didn't argue. He looked at me with that respectful unease young men reserve for women who sound absolutely sure. "Then all we need is a current valuation. Once that's filed, you can list the property as you see fit. We can arrange an appraisal this week." "Do it," I said. "Expedited." His pen hesitated halfway down the page. "May I ask why the urgency?" I met his eyes. "Because it's still my name on the title, and I intend for it to mean something before anyone decides it doesn't." He nodded, not quite understanding, but wise enough not to question. "You'll receive a call by Friday," he said. Outside, I paused under the awning. The sun had burned through the morning chill, leaving the air thick with the metallic hum of traffic. Across the street, a bakery window reflected me, older, thinner, but upright. Behind that reflection, rows of croissants and lemon bars gleamed under the light. Sweet things pretending time doesn't pass. I crossed, ordered a tea, and sat by the window facing the street. A text arrived from Evan before the cup touched my lips. "Dad said you're upset. Can we talk before this gets out of hand?" Out of hand. The phrase pulsed on the screen like a bruise. "No," I thought. "It's finally in my hands." I didn't reply. Instead, I looked out at the cars, the small-town rhythm of errands and engines, the illusion of normal. A delivery truck passed with the words, "We move lives," printed in cheerful blue. I almost laughed. That afternoon, I made another call. From the quiet of my car, parked behind the grocery store, where the air smelled like overripe apples and exhaust. The number belonged to Marjorie Lane, a realtor recommended by me years ago when I'd half-joked about downsizing. She answered on the second ring. "Lane Realty." "Marjorie," I said, "this is Ruth Marin. I'd like to sell a house." "Of course," she said, cheerful and brisk. "Can I ask what kind of property we're talking about?" "An old one," I said, "full of memory and quiet ghosts. Nothing fancy, just honest walls." She chuckled softly. "Those sell better than fancy ones. When would you like to list?" "Soon, but quietly." There was a pause. Realtors understand the word quietly. It means there's a story under the paperwork. "I can come by tomorrow," she said. "Walk the place, take notes, discuss strategy." "Tomorrow's good." I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap. The air around me felt charged, the way it does before a thunderstorm. Not dangerous, just certain. When I got home, I found a letter slid under the door. The handwriting was Evan's. Uneven, hurried, his lowercase letters leaning forward like they were running from something. "Mom, please don't do anything drastic. We just need to talk. Paige thinks we can find a solution. Don't turn this into a war." A war. That word did it. The sound of it, so dramatic, so self-defensive. They thought this was war. They hadn't yet understood that wars make noise. Justice whispers. I placed the letter on the table beside the tart May had left. The crust had gone soft, but it still smelled like comfort. I took one bite, then another, not because I was hungry, but because it felt ceremonial, an offering to something finished. When the clock hit 9, I opened the drawer again. The deed still waited, edges straight, ready. I ran my thumb along the seal, then closed the folder. No trembling, no second-guessing. May called at 9:15. "You sound steady," she said. "I am." "Good. Steady women scare small men." I smiled. "Then I guess I'm about to terrify a few." The next morning, Marjorie arrived in a cream blazer and boots too clean for a yard like mine. She walked through the rooms with practiced eyes, tapping notes into her phone. "Strong bones," she said. "Beautiful light in the kitchen. That garden could use trimming, but buyers love mature trees." "I planted those with my husband," I said. "He liked things that outlived us." Marjorie looked up, something kind flickering in her expression. "We'll find someone who sees that as a blessing, not a burden." Her words landed like small anchors in water, gentle but grounding. When she left, I sat at the table again, my pen over the notebook from the night before. I added one more line. Step 2 complete. The story has left the porch. The house creaked in response, like an old friend shifting in its chair. Later that evening, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, phone in hand, half expecting another text. But none came. The silence itself began to feel like language. Clear, deliberate, and overdue. I took out the pear tart, sliced the last corner, and whispered to the empty room, "Let them wonder." Then I did what frightened them most. Nothing at all. The appraisers arrived on a Friday morning that smelled like wet stone and new beginnings. 2 women in gray coats and flat shoes, polite to the point of reverence. They moved through my home with measuring tapes and tablets, murmuring in numbers and terms I didn't need to understand. "This house has a pulse," one of them said quietly, running a finger along the windowsill Nolan had carved initials into when we first moved here. "You can tell when someone loved a place." For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Love leaves fingerprints, but so does neglect. They finished within an hour, thanked me, and promised their report by Monday. When they drove off, the sound of their tires faded into a stillness that hummed like tension stretched too thin. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the space their car had occupied. Inside, the house felt different, emptier, expectant. I walked from room to room, the soles of my shoes whispering over the floor. Every creak sounded like a countdown. At the table, the notebook lay open where I'd left it. Step 3. Prepare the ground for fire. It wasn't rage I felt, it was calibration. The quiet kind of fury that knows exactly where to aim. By evening, the sky had turned the color of bruised lavender. I made soup out of habit and turned on the small radio Nolan used to keep in the garage. The local station was reading obituaries and weather updates. Nothing about me, not yet. Then the phone buzzed. "Evan." "Mom, please. We need to talk face to face. You're not thinking clearly." "Paige is worried." Worried. The word rolled through me like a pebble down a dry well. They weren't worried when they locked me out. They were worried now, when I had something they couldn't manage. I didn't answer. The next day, May came over with 2 mugs of coffee and a small brown envelope. "Found this in the mailbox," she said. "Looks official." It was from the county clerk's office. Confirmation of my scheduled appraisal record. Legal, binding, moving forward. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," I said. "It's moving." She studied my face. "You've got that look, Ruth." "What look?" "The look women get when they stop asking permission." That night, I dreamed of the house without walls. Just the frame, bare beams, open sky. I was standing inside it, wind moving through like a river. Nolan was somewhere in that wind, his voice steady. "It's still home if you're standing in it." When I woke, the clock read 4:07 a.m., the kind of hour when thoughts grow teeth. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and wrote a single line in the notebook. They called it drastic. I call it fair. Monday arrived with rain, hard and clean. The appraiser's report came via email at 8:42 a.m. Numbers, photos, and a figure that made my heart skip. More than I expected. Enough to start over anywhere I pleased. I forwarded it to Marjorie with 2 words. Proceed quietly. Her reply came minutes later. Understood. I'll handle the listing. Discretion guaranteed. By noon, the first offer arrived in her inbox. A retired couple from Vermont, cash buyer, quick close. I read the email twice before setting it aside. The house sighed. It actually sighed the kind of long, low creak that happens when wood loosens under humidity. Or maybe when memory lets go. The doorbell rang. I didn't move. It rang again. And again. Finally, I opened it. Evan stood there, soaked from the rain. His face pale with something between guilt and disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked. "Drying the floors," I said. "You're dripping on them." He glanced past me, taking in the near-empty shelves, the sealed boxes stacked neatly by the wall. "You're serious." "I usually am." "Selling the house?" "Without talking to us." "Paige says you're being manipulated. That someone convinced you." "Into what?" "Deciding where I live." I crossed my arms. "I think I've earned the right to manipulate myself." He flinched at that. "This is our family home." I stepped closer, rain misting between us. "You mean my home? The one I signed for, painted, patched, paid for, and slept in alone for 12 years while you were building your own." "Mom, you're upset." "I'm awake." He looked away, jaw tight. "You don't have to do this." "I already did." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like someone trying to catch words they didn't believe they'd need. Finally, he said, "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." I smiled, calm and sharp. "I stopped collecting regrets the day you told me to apologize on my own porch." For the first time in months, he didn't have an answer. He turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. When the rain eased, I closed the door and leaned against it. The wood was warm from my palm. A strange, electric stillness filled the room. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even sad. I felt like someone standing on a bridge that had finally stopped swaying. That evening, Marjorie called again. "We have a clean offer," she said. "Full price. They want to close by the end of the month. Are you ready?" I looked around, the quiet kitchen, the light pooling across the floor, the absence that had once hurt and now felt like space. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." After the call, I opened the window. The air smelled of wet grass and something faintly metallic, like the world was cooling after being forged. I sat at the table and wrote one final note in the book. They thought they locked me out. They never noticed I had the key to the foundation. Then I blew out the candle and let the dark settle in, calm as a verdict. The signature took exactly 4 seconds. That's how long it took for 40 years to unhook themselves from paper and memory. The pen barely whispered against the page. No drama, no hesitation. Just ink, final and neat. Marjorie slid the documents into a manila envelope, her red nails tapping once on the table before she said, "That's it, Ruth. The house is officially under contract. Closing date, the 29th. The 29th. A number without nostalgia. Congratulations," she added. "It doesn't feel like that," I said. "It rarely does," she replied, smiling the way people do when they understand more than they're willing to say. Outside the office, the sky had the color of melted pewter. A storm was folding itself together over the Ohio Valley. I walked to my car slowly, the wind carrying that metallic scent that always comes before lightning. By the time I reached home, the first drops had started. They hit the roof in deliberate intervals, as if the weather itself were marking time. I made tea, sat at the table, and stared at the folder now resting beside me, the one that no longer held ownership papers, only copies. The real deed was gone, transferred, processed, digitized, and archived under someone else's name. A ping. My phone lit up. "Evan, you actually sold it?" Then another. "Tell me you didn't." I typed nothing. 10 minutes later, a new message. You've lost your mind. Lightning flashed outside, catching on the window latch. In that split second of brightness, I saw my reflection and almost didn't recognize it. My face looked calm, unreasonably calm. Then came the call. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding, Evan said. His voice had the edge of panic I hadn't heard since he was a boy and broke a neighbor's window with a baseball. There's no misunderstanding, I said. You didn't even tell us. Paige is furious. She says this is vindictive. That's a strong word, I said. You'd think it takes a lot of effort to be vindictive. I just sign papers. He went quiet, then said, Do you even know what you've done to the family? I gave it back to myself. Dad would be ashamed. Your father would be proud that I finally learned to finish what I start. Thunder rolled then long and deep. Somewhere outside, a car alarm stuttered. The storm was directly above us. Where are you going to go? He asked finally. I haven't decided yet. He let out a breath that sounded like defeat. You can't just walk away. I already did, I said and ended the call. The phone buzzed again seconds later, but I silenced it. Outside, the storm let loose. Rain sheeted down the windows, blurring the world into watercolor. I stood there for a while, watching the sky pour itself out, feeling something inside me do the same. By morning, the air was washed clean. The street glittered with puddles and sunlight. On the porch sat a small package wrapped in brown paper. No note, no return address. Inside, one of the family photo frames I'd left behind. Glass cracked clean across the middle. A single picture remained. Nolan holding baby Evan. Sunlight flooding the backyard. I ran my thumb across the break. The fracture didn't ruin the image. It completed it. At noon, Marjorie called. The buyers confirmed the closing date. Funds will be wired by next week. You'll receive the full amount minus standard fees. Perfect, I said. You're handling this better than most people would, she said softly. I've had practice losing things, I replied. That afternoon, I drove to the credit union and opened a new account. The clerk was young, polite, and oblivious to the significance of what she was doing. When she asked what to label the account, I said, Freedom Fund. She didn't blink, just typed it into her system. The money would go there soon. And when it did, it wouldn't sit still. Back home, I began to pack in earnest. Each object was a decision. Keep, give, erase. I moved through the rooms like a surgeon, precise, detached, efficient. By sunset, half the house was boxed. The rest waited in quiet judgment. That's when Lena arrived. She didn't text first, just knocked and walked in. Raincoat over her arm, eyes already glassy. Grandma, she said, Dad's losing it. He's saying crazy things. That you've been manipulated. That someone took advantage of you. I smiled. They think agency expires with age. It doesn't. She bit her lip. He says you're punishing them. I poured her tea, pushed the cup across the table. Then maybe they should ask why they feel punished. She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, Are you happy? No, I said honestly. But I'm clear. Lena nodded slowly. That's almost better. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the refrigerator hum and the floorboard settle. Outside, a late gust of wind rattled the branches, the world rearranging itself. Before she left, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Dad wanted me to give you this. Inside was a printed email, formal, cold, addressed from Evan to the probate office, County of Kingsford. Subject line, Temporary hold on property transfer request. My son was trying to stop the sale. I laughed quietly. He's too late. Lena frowned. Will it cause trouble? No, I said, folding the paper neatly. He's just building himself a new story to live inside. She hesitated at the door. Do you want me to talk to him? Not yet. Let him sit with the echo for a while. When she was gone, the house seemed to expand in the quiet, each empty space a small victory. I took the cracked photo frame and placed it face down in the trash. Then I poured myself another cup of tea and stood by the window as the last light slid off the street. They thought selling the house was revenge. It wasn't. Revenge is still coming. It just doesn't look like fire. It looks like silence, legality, and the sudden absence of a woman they thought would never leave. I looked around the half-packed room and said aloud, "Let them find out what ghosts do when you give them back their keys." And for the first time in years, I laughed, quietly, freely, like the sound of glass finally cooling after the heat. The wire cleared at 9:18 a.m. on a Thursday. A single ping on my phone, no fanfare, no confetti. Just numbers rearranging themselves into freedom. I watched the screen for a long time, the way you watch a door finally close behind you. Then I called the credit union. "This is Ruth Marin," I said. "I'd like to transfer the full balance to a private trust under my granddaughter's name. Confidential. Long-term growth, no shared access." The manager paused, then said, "We can certainly set that up, ma'am. Do you have a co-signer?" "I don't need one," I replied. "That's the point." It took 40 minutes, a few notarized forms, and one deep breath. When I hung up, I had a trust in place, a living, breathing shield carrying Lena's future and my final word. Outside, the world looked strangely level. The clouds hung low over Kingsford like they were trying to listen. May stopped by that afternoon with a loaf of cornbread and eyes full of curiosity. "So," she said, leaning against the counter, "is it done?" "It's done," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Freedom's always quieter than you expect." I smiled. It's the silence before the echo. We ate the cornbread warm, butter melting in uneven pools. She didn't ask where I was going next, and I didn't offer. Some friendships don't need explanations. They just guard the doorway while you leave. That evening, the messages started. First, from Evan. "Mom, I just got a notice from the bank. What is this transfer? Are you out of your mind?" Then Paige. "You can't just give away family assets like that. You've destabilized everything." The irony of that word, family, almost made me laugh. They thought the house was the inheritance. They never understood that I was the lesson. I put my phone face down and turned on the radio. Static first, then a blues song about a woman who left town before sunrise. I liked her already. The next day, Lena came over again, unannounced, hair still damp from the rain. "Grandma," she said, breathless, they found out. I poured her tea without asking. "How bad?" "Dad's furious. Mom keeps saying you're destroying the family's legacy. They think you're punishing them." I stirred honey into my cup. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just redistributing the narrative." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they built the story where I was the background. I just rewrote the ending." Lena blinked, half smiling. "Did you really transfer everything to me?" "I did." Her voice dropped. "Why?" "Because you see me. That's enough." She sat very still for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "They're not going to forgive you." "I didn't ask them to," I said. That night, I sat by the window while the crickets stitched their small music into the dark. The cottage smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh paper, the scent of things newly owned. I thought of Nolan then, of the years we spent believing kindness was a currency that would never run out. He would have smiled at this version of me, steadier, colder, maybe even a little dangerous. At 11:03, another text buzzed through. "Evan, you've really disappointed me." I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I typed back for the first time in weeks. "Good. Disappointment means you expected me to stay small. I'm not small anymore." I hit send. The delivery checkmark appeared, then nothing. No reply. The silence that followed was the cleanest sound I'd ever heard. The following morning, I drove out of Kingsford before sunrise. The roads were slick, the world half asleep. In the back seat, 2 suitcases and a shoebox labeled "Keep Breathing." Inside, Nolan's watch, my wedding ring, Lena's first crayon drawing of a house with a sun twice its size. I stopped at a diner 2 towns over. Blue vinyl booths, the smell of burnt toast, a waitress with chipped nail polish who called everyone honey. I ate eggs and toast and felt something inside me settle like dust finding its floor. When I stepped back outside, the sky was pale and untroubled. I didn't know where I was headed yet, but for the first time, not knowing felt like choice, not chaos. As I drove, my phone buzzed one last time. A voicemail from Paige. "You've ruined everything, Ruth. The house, the inheritance, Evan's peace of mind. You can't undo this. People will think you've lost control." I smiled as the road opened ahead, endless and forgiving. Control. They still thought I was trying to lose it, but the truth was simpler, sharper. I'd finally taken back. The cottage emptied itself slowly, as if it too knew the script by heart. Every cupboard, every drawer released its contents without protest. The last to go was the teapot, small, chipped, loyal. I wrapped it in an old scarf and placed it in the box marked for the next quiet place. By dawn, the movers had come and gone. The room stood bare, echoing like memory after it's spoken aloud. I made one last round through the house, touching the door frames the way you touch a sleeping child before leaving the room. Then I sat at the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and began the final entry. "Lena, by the time you read this, I'll be near the water. Not to vanish, just to let the air rearrange itself around me. The world will tell you I walked away from everything. But that isn't true. I walked toward something I'd forgotten, space, breath, myself. Don't waste time defending me to your parents. They live inside a version of the story where I stayed small, apologetic, predictable. Let them. Every generation needs its ghost to keep the furniture of guilt from gathering dust. You, my dear, have what I never did at your age, permission. Use it freely. Love like you mean it. Leave when you must. Keep your own name safe. And remember, peace isn't soft. It's sharp, deliberate, earned. Everything I had to give is already yours. Not because you asked, but because you saw me when everyone else looked through me. With love, Grandma." I folded the letter and slid it into an envelope. Across the front, I wrote her name in neat blue ink. No return address. She'd know where it came from. Then I stood, carried the envelope to the post box at the end of the gravel road, and let it drop through the slot. The sound was small, but absolute. By afternoon, I was on the train heading east. The landscape unrolled in muted greens and browns. Fields surrendering to hills, hills fading into fog. Somewhere beyond that fog waited the coast. No one knew my destination. That was the gift. I arrived at a small town where the air tasted of salt and iron, and the sky was always undecided between gray and gold. The inn sat on a bluff, its paint weathered, its windows open to the sound of gulls. The woman at the desk didn't ask for ID, just smiled, handed me a brass key, and said, "Room 7. Faces the sea." The room smelled of cedar and rain. I opened the window and let the wind come in. It carried the distant crash of waves and the faint echo of a freight train miles inland. That night, I walked along the shoreline in shoes that would never survive sand. The tide whispered against the rocks like a language I almost remembered. I thought of Nolan then, of the way he used to tilt his head when he was proud of me but too shy to say it. I thought of Lena's laugh, of May's cornbread, of the porch that started all this. I thought of doors, how sometimes closing one is the only way to let a window mean something. At some point I realized I was smiling, not from triumph, not from relief, but from recognition. I had finally become the woman I'd promised myself I'd be the day they barred me from my own threshold. A wave came higher than the rest, soaking the hem of my pants. I laughed and didn't step back. The sea didn't take, it returned. When I went back to the inn, the night clerk nodded politely. "Good evening," he said. It is, I answered and meant it. Upstairs, I placed the teapot on the windowsill, lit a candle, and poured myself a cup of chamomile. Outside, the ocean kept breathing. For the first time in decades, I didn't check my phone, didn't wait for anyone's voice. I simply existed, unapologetic, unowned, alive. In Kingsford, they would argue for weeks. Paige would compose long emails. Evan would talk about betrayal, about how things should have been handled differently. Lena would read my letter and understand what none of them could. That walking away wasn't disappearance, it was definition. Maybe one day she'd do the same. At sunrise, I sat by the window and opened a new notebook. The first line came easily, steady as the tide. I am not sorry. I am free. Then I closed it, set down the pen, and watched the light spill over the water, turning everything it touched into truth. And that was enough.